Hello, my name is Kendall, and that beautiful little dog whose tummy you just saw there is Chai, and this is Kendoodling. So today I'm going to paint those very beautiful flowers that you just saw. Those are extremely special for a reason. First of all, that my reference photo was taken by my dear friend Alan, so shout out to them. And so those are called Maguire's Primrose, and Maguire's Primrose is really special because it grows in one place in the entire world, and that place is Logan Canyon in Logan, Utah. Not even other canyons here in Logan, Utah, only in Logan Canyon, which I think is just crazy that we have a flower that only grows here. That's where I'm from, by the way. So I think that's just extremely cool. So of course I have to paint it. There's also a new brewery that opened up in my hometown, and that's their logo. So that's what inspired this piece is good old Home Range Brewing in Logan, Utah. If you live in Logan, go get a beer. They're very good. Would recommend. So I'm starting out just sketching it out. I'm trying to make this my own. So I'm kind of just picking my favorite flowers from the flower bunch in my reference photo. Like if it's zoomed out, you can see that there's multiple little patches of flowers within that cliff face. So I'm picking the ones that I think are most interesting and that I like the shape of the most. Maguire's Primrose has such a beautiful thick foliage. All of those leaves just lay so nicely. So that's what I'm trying to capture the essence of. I also this is kind of new for me, this style that I'm doing here, because I'm generally want to have a full background that reaches to the edges of the canvas, and in this one I want to kind of keep it more simple. I want to keep that more light tan sort of background, and so I'm not gonna push it all the way to the edges of the canvas. And so for that reason, I'm picking and choosing the leaves that I'm including strategically, because I want it to have a more rounded sort of shape so that it fits within that canvas nicely, but I still want it to look natural. I don't want it to just be a nice, perfect, rounded circle. And as I'm sketching these leaves, you can also see that I moved that flower. I've moved that flower up, and then I moved it back down, the top one. It's just this is sketch phase, this is the phase for me to just kind of play around with it and figure out exactly how I want it to be. There's no wrong answers. I can kind of just try something, and then if I don't like it, I can erase it and move it. And I'm trying to just not take anything too seriously or view it as too permanent at this point. And now these lines that I'm adding into the background are the cliff lines that you can see in my reference photo. So I want to have kind of a little bit of a cliff sort of background, but I plan on having that fade as well. But I want to have that cliff for context, because I think that that's a really important feature. It's something that is really makes the Maguire's Primrose what it is that it grows out of those cracks in the cliff like that. I'm starting out painting these leaves kind of more of a sagey green than they actually are in the photo. I am going for, not really sure how to describe the vibe, more of kind of a botanical illustration sort of vibe. Not fully, but I want it to feel outdoorsy, maybe kind of friendly and approachable. A lot of the time I want my art to be really dark and very full vibrancy kind of colors. These are still vibrant, but anyway, I'm kind of playing with just a different color of green than I usually do. So we're kind of gonna see how that goes. So as I'm painting these leaves, I picked a sort of just mid-tone yellow-green sort of color. And then for the shadows, I'm just going for a slightly less saturated and darker tone. And then for the highlights, I'm going for a more saturated, lighter tone. And then I realized as I was continuing on with these leaves, I wanted even darker, because I felt like it needed a little bit more contrast toward the center of the leaves. But I'm kind of just laying out general color, just kind of sketching in this part of the leaf is generally darker to give it a little bit of shape, but I'm planning on coming back in later and doing more detail that way. And then for these flowers, I I'm wanting to go for a slightly more darker purple. A lot of the time when you see these primrose flowers, they are a little bit darker than this reference photo. I'm sure there's plenty of variation, but I wanted them to be slightly more saturated. And so that's kind of where I'm starting with these. I left my color picker in the video so that you can see what the different colors look like in reference to one another. So like you can see that my main tone, and then for like that more middle darker tone, I like pushed it a little bit further red and a little bit darker. And then for the edges of the leaves, I made them less saturated and a little bit lighter. And then usually when I'm painting multiple of the same thing in a row, like since right now I'm doing multiple of the same flower, I tend to pick all of my colors. For the first flower, I'll kind of play with it a little bit as I go. And then after I get my colors established for my first one, I generally will just color pick from my first flower so that all of them are kind of generally matching. And then I'll do like slight variation within all of the flowers because I don't want them to look perfectly printed. Like I want them to look like they have their own unique flair, but I'll generally color pick so that it stays kind of consistent. But sometimes if I want them to look more unique, or if I'm just trying to challenge myself, then I will pick all of the colors directly from the color wheel for every single color that I pick for every single flower, so that they all have even a slight variation amongst themselves with color. And so I think that's kind of fun too. Just depends on my approach, you know? I love how the Maguire's Primrose is so simple and so effortlessly beautiful. Like it feels pretty like traditional shaped flowers, pretty traditional standard leaf. If you didn't know anything about leaves and you didn't have a reference photo, I feel like it would be pretty good chance that you would end up sketching a leaf that looked like these leaves. And yet they're just like very stunning. It just like has a really lovely effect. It's a very effortless beauty. This cliff face was I honestly thought it was going to be harder to pull off than it was, because I was like, how am I going to make it look like a cliff but not go to the edges of the canvas? Because like I said, I'm like so used to doing just a full ass background. But this time I was like trying to make it so that it all generally kind of fades off to a certain extent. And so I played with it a bit, but I never really felt like it was too difficult. Like I never felt particularly stumped by it. I tried to leave, so I used my turpentine brush for the dark part, and then I dropped the size really high, and then I turned the opacity down a little bit, and then I just like tapped with my pencil around the edges to make it so that it has that brushstroke texture, and I think it looks really nice. I really like how it's turning out. And then I decided to add a little bit of that orange lichen color. I love the lichen on the rock. I think it looks so pretty, and I originally was wondering if I wanted to add that because I didn't want to throw off my color theme. But I eventually decided to, because it's just like such a small little pop of color. Once again, it's one of those things that I just think really gives it character. It just adds the context that it needs to make it feel like a Maguire's Primrose. Like it's grown in this big old cliff, and big old cliffs often have lichen. And I think that little pop of color also just makes it interesting. And it kind of brings out the yellow that's in the center of the flowers as well. It kind of ties that in. Okay, so this is one of my favorite tricks that I learned early on in my learning to paint process. If I'm like feeling stumped or unsure of how a painting is turning out, I'll just screenshot it, and then I will make it black and white. And then if you look at it black and white, oftentimes that can show you how your values are looking. And so if it still maintains that same essence, like you can still tell exactly what's going on. And if your values aren't very good, then it will look a little bit more muddy, look a little more confusing. And this one, when I turned it black and white, it looks a little muddy, I think. And so that made me realize that I need more contrast to make it pop a little bit better. And I also realized I don't know, something about the leaves is just bugging me. Like something about the yellowy green just doesn't quite give it the effect that I want. And so I'm I'm adding a little bit of more fully green, more of a bluer green to it, especially in the center. I'm kind of wondering that if I have more of a bluey green in the middle and then the yellow green as highlights on the edges, if that will make it pop. So I'm kind of trying that for a minute. And then I also when I looked at the black and white version, I realized that the flowers looked like that outside line was too distinct. Like it looks too much like they are outlined. And so I'm going back in and adding smaller, more refined details. A big thing that I'm doing is kind of blending that outside color so that it looks like it's a natural fade, like it's the position of the flower and the lighting rather than the flowers having like a light outline around the petals. And then I also wanted to kind of touch them up a little bit, kind of fix some of the edges looked a little bit too blurry. So going in with my gloaming pencil and touching those up so that they look more refined. Something that I've been working on in my paintings recently is having a good mix of warm and cool colors. Even in a piece that has more warm colors or more cool colors, I'm trying to add the opposite in order to make it pop a little bit more. That's just like another way, you know, like I think that contrast in terms of lights and darks is important, and I think that contrast in terms of warm and cool is also important. So that's why I'm adding just a little bit of a cooler sort of white into the cliff face, just to make everything pop a little bit better. At this point, I was starting to get a little frustrated, as you can see, because it just really was not turning out the way that I wanted. Like, it just didn't really pop. It just looked kind of like sickly. Like, I think that I have too much of an association with more yellowy leaves as meaning that the plant is chlorotic. That's not what I'm going for. And so, thus, I have decided to redo all of the leaves. This doesn't happen that often. Like, this doesn't happen that often to where if I do like a little bit of touch-ups or slightly alter color, that it's not enough. Like, it needed a full revamp. So I'm going back and I am completely repainting all of the leaves. But I redid that first one with more of that emerald sort of green, and I think it looks way better. I think it just pops so much more. And I'm also making it a lot more dark. So my base, like mid-tone, is quite a bit darker. It's like probably almost as dark as like the darkest tone of my first go-around there. So trying that again, and hopefully that will add the contrast that it needs to pop a little bit more. So I decided to repaint all of the leaves on a second layer just in case I still hated it. And so that I could easily undo it, which I'm now glad about, because as you can see here, as I turn on and off that second layer with the new color, you can see the difference, and it just feels fairly night and day to me. Like, it just looks so much better with this more emerald green. I just love it so much more. So I'm going to stick with that and just do more touch-ups now. A big thing that I'm doing is adding more dark into the center of the flowers so that they look more deep, so that they look like the whole is more pronounced. I think that just gives them a little bit more depth and shape. And then also adding more of those individual lines in the center of the flowers. And then I'm also outlining pretty much all of the leaves and the flowers again a bit more. Off camera, I also was just playing with the background, and I started out with just like 4, thin lines, and I played with having more of like an orangey kind of background to bring out that lichen color. And I ended up just erasing parts of the line, and so that it's not just like a perfect square. And then after I felt better about the leaf color and had kind of added a little bit more contrast into the flowers, I decided to screenshot it and turn it black and white again. And you can see how that looks, and I think it is just so much more obvious. Here you can see me going back and forth between that mid painting black and white version that I had and then that final black and white version, and you can just see how much of a difference. So I think that's all, folks. Okay, I'm putting my signature on this thing, so I'm calling it done. So thank you so much for watching this video. Please let me know what you think. I would love to hear any comments that you have. Wouldn't mind liking it. That would help me out a lot. And I will see you in the next video.